Hey everyone, welcome back. This is part 2 to the history of psychology, and what we're going to focus on in this lecture are what we call the contemporary perspectives, or sometimes referred to as approaches to psychology. So you may recall the last lecture ended with this idea that we had structuralists and functionalists, and they were kind of rivals trying to figure out what's the purpose of psychology. The structuralists are going to look at the structure of the mind. The functionalists are going to look at the function or the purpose of the mind. The reality is, in 2020, we don't really have structuralists and functionalists anymore. Instead, psychologists often identify with one of the contemporary perspectives that you're going to see in this video. And there are 6 of them. It'll take a while for you to fully wrap your mind around these 6 perspectives and how they differentiate, because there can be a lot of overlap between them. Know that this whole course, we are going to spend time going through these 6 perspectives. We'll have a whole unit, for example, talking about psychodynamic theory. We will have a whole unit on cognitive psychology and behaviorism. So if you still feel a little wishy-washy and not quite sure about these perspectives by the end of the lecture, that's okay. This is just an introduction to their existence. I'll give you a brief idea of what they're talking about, but know that we will get lots of more information regarding these 6 perspectives throughout the entirety of the course. So, what are they trying to do? Well, imagine that you're not feeling great and you feel like you need to maybe call a psychologist, right? You're going to call a therapist because you're having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. You don't feel like you have a lot to contribute. You don't enjoy hanging out with your friends anymore. And you're thinking, maybe I need to talk to a professional. And you're asking yourself, why do I think, feel, and act the way that I do? Well, depending on who you ask, they might have a different answer for you. And we don't have to go down the road of abnormal psychology or mental health issues. You can be really excited and really happy and optimistic and tons of friends, and you still want to know, why do I think and feel and act the way that I do? Why am I the way that I am, and my friend and my family, and then they're all different? So the big question in psychology that I ask over and over again, why do we think, feel, and act the way that we do? That is a complicated question. Depending on who you ask, they're going to give you some different answers. So let's dive in first with what many people probably think about when they think about psychology, and that is the psychoanalytic, or what we often now refer to as the psychodynamic approach. It was started by this guy, Sigmund Freud. And the idea behind the psychodynamic approach is that there is a big part of our mind that we are largely unaware of. You can consciously be aware that you want to get good grades in psychology, good grades at school. Psychodynamic theory is curious, well, what is the underlying reason for that? What do these grades represent? Is it to make your parents happy? Is it to make you feel successful? Is it so that you have a better understanding of the world and how people function? The psychodynamic approach believes that our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are driven by these unconscious drives, these experiences that exist a long time ago that we may not even be able to recall. For example, psychologists who believe in the psychodynamic approach, they put a lot of emphasis in attachment at young ages and how children have relationships with their parents. So when you were 2 years old, the relationship that you maybe did or did not have with your mother or your father or stepmom, stepdad, whoever it may be, that relationship, according to psychodynamic psychologists, that relationship can impact who you are today. You may not have any memory of it, but it's still impacting your present. And so psychodynamic theory, the key word that you want to look for is unconscious, right? Or unconscious mind. If you see that, we are likely talking about the psychodynamic theory. The cognitive perspective, on the other hand, is what you are thinking about, right? How you perceive the world. If you believe that you don't have much value in this world, for example, if you are incredibly optimistic, cognitive psychologists look at mental processes. They say that the reason we think, feel, and act the way that we do is because of how we perceive the world, which may or may not be accurate, right? So cognitive psychologists, cognition is all about the thought process itself. The behavioral perspective, the idea behind behaviorism, it can be summed up really in one word: learning. Some people would say training or conditioning. So why do we think, feel, and act the way that we do? Why do I hang out with some people but not others? Why do I have an optimistic attitude? Well, it's because, according to behaviorists, because we've learned to act that way. We've learned to think that way and feel that way. Many behaviorists are going to argue that if we are rewarded for a particular behavior, we will continue to do it. If we're punished for something, we'll probably stop doing that, right? You wear a certain shirt to school and you get compliments, you'll wear that shirt again. You wear a shirt to school and people laugh at you and make fun of you, probably not going to wear that shirt again. So behaviorists are looking at how we are conditioned over time. Now, I want to make sure that we understand the behavioral perspective, or what we sometimes call behaviorism, is not the same thing as behavior. Behavior is what you do, how you act. All psychologists are trying to figure out our behavior, right? Why did that person act that certain way? The behavioral perspective, or behaviorism, says, well, you are behaving that way because you were conditioned or trained to behave that way. But a cognitive psychologist, a psychoanalytic, would also explain behavior. They would just explain it differently. You are behaving that way because of your unconscious mind. You are behaving that way because of your thought process. So make sure that you can differentiate behavior and action with behaviorism, or the behavioral perspective. And that can be a little confusing at first. The humanistic perspective brings in the idea of free will. Why do we think, feel, and act the way that we do? Why do you feel the way that you feel right now? Why do you think the things that you think? Well, the humanistic perspective believes that, well, because it's our choice, right? That's kind of your key word, your red flag. You behave the way that you do because you are in charge of yourself. You're in charge of your mind. You're in charge of your body. And so the humanistic perspective looks a lot at setting personal goals and having people try to live up to their fullest potential. Humanistic psychologists, for example, often will talk about this concept of the ideal self, right? Like the perfect Mr. Harmon that's out there. So I have my actual self, the person that I am, and I have my ideal self, the person that I want to be. And humanistic psychologists try to bring these two things together. How do I think, feel, and act? Well, the ways that I think, feel, and act are all an attempt to make my actual self and my ideal self congruent. Biological psychologists, the biological perspective is pretty straightforward. If we're trying to figure out why do we think, feel, and act the way that we do, well, biological psychologists focus on the tangibles. They focus on things that are internal. They look at things like neurotransmitters in our brain. They look at hormones in our blood. Maybe I'm full of rage right now because I've got a bunch of testosterone pumping through my blood at the moment. Maybe I'm feeling down in the dumps and I don't feel very good because I don't have enough of this really important neurotransmitter in my brain called serotonin. So biological psychologists are trying to look at the internal, something physical that is leading to us thinking, feeling, and acting a certain way. And then the sixth one is what we call the social perspective. And why do I think, feel, and act the way that I do? Well, because of the interaction I have with others, right? Because I hang out with other people who are optimistic. Or if you think about the other side of the coin, you've maybe experienced this before. You might have that friend or family member who always complains. Every time you see them, they're upset and they complain. And you might find that when you are around that person, you start complaining too. You start to act in a way that is similar to them. So social psychologists look at how our behavior is influenced and impacted by the people that we spend time with. And social psychology will be one of our last units of the year, and we'll go into detail about how interactions with people and groups can impact how we think, feel, and act. Now, here's the thing with these 6 perspectives that I went really fast through. All of those perspectives help us answer some questions as to why do we think, feel, and act the way that we do. But none of them answer all questions, meaning none of those perspectives is 100% correct. So, what many psychologists do is they try to take a more holistic approach, kind of a hybrid model of all of these perspectives. And we call that the biopsychosocial approach. And I have this kind of graphic up in front of you here. Why do we think, feel, and act the way that we do? Well, it's probably a combination of lots of different things. You think, feel, and act the way that you do because, in part, of your genetics, in part because of the food that you eat, right? The hormones in your blood. You also think, feel, and act the way that you do because of more psychological factors, things that you have been taught and conditioned over time, right? Parenting styles, the schools that you attend, if you have been rewarded or punished in the past for certain actions and thoughts and behaviors and things. And in part, you think, feel, and act the way that you do because of the people that you spend time with, right? The social aspect, the environment in which you live, if you're experiencing stress or trauma. So the biopsychosocial approach is attempting to answer that question, why do we think, feel, and act the way we do, by taking bits and pieces from these 6 main, what we call contemporary perspectives. So that was fast. You might feel a little overwhelmed. We will spend time practicing these 6 perspectives, differentiating them, making sure that throughout the course of the year, you will have a solid understanding of these different schools of thought. As always, if you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to reach out, and best of luck.